Hi friends, you're listening to the Happiness Soundtrack. We're here to talk about the relationship between music and happy memories. My name is Jana Barrett, but you can call me Jana Banana. I'm a commercial flight attendant who is fascinated by the associations we form with music. And for me, one of those associations got too strong. So for my birthday in 2024, I decided to spend a full year listening only to music I'd never heard before. To find new songs, I started passing around a journal, asking people to write about a song that reminds them of a happy memory. And those songs are what I call the Happiness Soundtrack. I try to ask at least one person a day, and I'll keep going until every page of that journal is full. This is where I share some of the songs, the stories, and the beautiful moments that unfold from that one simple question. If you'd like to get a link to every episode along with all the show notes, you can subscribe to emails at happinesssoundtrack.com. There's a link in the show notes. The website also has more details about the project, such as monthly playlists of every song in the journal, and a submission page where you can share your song. So check that out when you get a chance. Before we get started, I wanted to say that I am changing the publishing cadence for the project. It's just not feasible for me to publish a new episode/blog post on a weekly basis at this point in my life. So I am doing every other week. I'm also not committing to a specific day of the week. I'm going to shoot for Fridays because Feel Good Friday is like a good day to talk about happy things. But my schedule with being a flight attendant is not consistent, not always reliable or predictable. And during the summer, it's pretty overwhelming. So in order to stay consistent, I have to reduce the frequency with the Happiness Soundtrack. So I appreciate you understanding that. Today I want to tell you about how I choose who to ask and some ways I go about doing that based on the setting and the context. So here we go. I want to start by saying that I personally believe that everyone has an answer to this question. That's why I ask it. And I wish I could ask literally everyone. Sometimes I look around wherever I'm at and observe all the people, and I think to myself, I could ask any of them and they would have an answer. I wonder what their song might be. What stories are waiting to be told there? And unfortunately, I don't get the opportunity to ask everyone, but I can always ask someone. So here are some of the ways I go about doing that, depending on the setting, the context, and the nature of the interaction. I looked through the journal, every single page, and categorized the different ways that I approach people. There are at least 33. It comes up in a lot of different ways, and that's one thing I love about it. Probably one thing that keeps it fresh and exciting for me also. I kind of tried to remove some redundancies and say, okay, what are some of the unique ways that I've had to ask based on a specific type of interaction or setting? And what are some of the most common ways? What are some of the most interesting ways? So that's what I'm going to share in this episode as well as a part 2. I broke it down into 15 primary ways or interesting ways that I talk to people about the project and get them to share their songs. Today we're going to go over 10 of those ways, and in the next episode I will share 5 more as well as some takeaways and insights from asking at least 500 people the same question in many different ways. So the whole project started by asking passengers. If you listen to episode 2, which is called Day 1 of the project, that would shed a lot of light on things, with the foundation and how it all started. But I was working a flight that day. It was the very first day of my music diet. It was also my 38th birthday. And I had a blank journal with me. I realized that I could use that to get music recommendations, but I didn't want to just hand it to people and ask them to write down music I should listen to. I figured that would be overwhelming for them and for me in order to try and keep up with it. So I tried to come up with a question that everyone would have an answer to about just one song, and every answer would be different. And at the least, if they said the same song, they would probably have a different story about it. I thought everyone would have a song tied to a memory, so I figured I'd ask about a happy one, and that's how I came up with the question. What's a song that reminds you of a happy memory? I just grabbed the journal and started walking through the aisle, and I figured I would ask any passengers who returned eye contact with me and smiled. So that's how I went about it the very first time. And a few rows into the economy cabin, a man looked up at me and smiled. And I stopped and said, "Hey, would you help me with something? I would love to know about a song you associate with a happy memory." And he was like, "Yeah, sure." He wrote it down. And that was that. So he wrote "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey. And I don't know the story behind it. I didn't feel comfortable asking right away. I figured if people wanted to share, then that was amazing, but I didn't feel right about asking to dig deeper with total strangers. I figured they had already been vulnerable enough just by participating. So I didn't really know how to handle that at first. So that's how it started. And because I try to ask at least one person a day, and the majority of interactions I have are through work, that means the majority of people represented in this project are passengers. That's how most of these conversations come about. Sometimes I do walk through the aisle again if I haven't really connected with anyone on the plane yet or built up some kind of rapport. Sometimes it happens just through little chit chat we have during boarding or during service. And then I will gravitate towards a couple people because we have somewhat of a rapport, or I can see they're really friendly, etc. But my favorite approach is to ask the pattern breakers. And that's what I refer to as people who stand out. Either they, make a specific point of engaging with me or with my crew members as people rather than, this transaction of passenger and flight attendant. That stands out to me and it makes me feel seen and appreciated and valued. And I absolutely want to make someone else feel the same way in return. There's several examples, but one that comes to mind that I would really like to share was during boarding on a 777. I know you're not listening to an aviation podcast, but you are going to learn bits and pieces about commercial aviation the more you listen to me. So if you don't know, a 777 is one of the biggest commercial aircraft made by Boeing, if not the biggest. I'm actually not sure. And the seating capacity on those is around like 280 to 330, depending on the configuration of the aircraft. At least in our fleet. Might be different with other airlines. By comparison, a little regional jet, that would be like 50 to 80 people, perhaps. Those are the airplanes that you take where you have to check your bag at the gate because it won't fit in an overhead bin, and then when you get off, you have to pick it up right there at the gate. That's a regional. Mainline is what Southwest flies. Their fleet is entirely 737s. But anyway, those fit about like 150 to 180 people, somewhere in that range. So that's the majority of what I fly. Planes with around 150 to 180 people. A 777 is twice that, generally. So it's twice the energy that you are being bombarded with and having to give. It's like at least twice the chaos. So I really don't like flying these wide bodies because it's just so much extra chaos for the same amount of time. But one day I was going to visit someone, and the trip that I had to work in order to get there was all on domestic wide bodies, all on 777s, and it was absolutely exhausting. And my position on this trip was to be the door greeter during boarding. That does not exclude you from the chaos. If anything, you are the funnel for the chaos because people come on board and you're the first person they see, and a lot of them have questions, and almost all of them don't know how to find their seat. It's a big plane, and I'm at the first door. Sometimes it's the only door that is used too. So I was standing there trying to ask every single person where they were sitting as they were coming on through this big door, several people at a time. And there are 4 possible directions they could go because there's 2 aisles and I'm in the middle of the plane, so they could go forward or they could go aft. And I had to know where they were sitting in order to direct them which aisle to use, or else they would go down the wrong one and then have to fight back against the crowd with their suitcases, and everyone would get frustrated and boarding would slow down, and then we might not leave on time. Okay, so those are the stakes. And during one of these very stressful boardings, I was, standing there with a smile on my face and saying, "Hi, welcome aboard. Hi, welcome aboard. Hi, where are you sitting? Hi, where are you sitting? Hey, welcome aboard. Hey, where's your seat?" Times 333 people per flight. Okay? It was exhausting. And in the midst of all this chaos and half of the people not listening to me or not hearing me, and me having to repeat myself while still not losing my patience or my smile, because that's important to me, during all of this, one passenger broke the pattern. He paused right in front of me, made eye contact, and smiled. And then he said, "Hi, good morning. How are you?" And it was just this calm in the midst of the storm. And for that one moment from one person, I felt seen. I felt noticed. I felt like I was a human again rather than this flight attendant robot that hardly anyone seemed to be paying attention to, even though I was just trying to help and do my job. So I really appreciated that. And I was actually caught very off guard, and I was probably kind of stumbling over myself. I think I said, I'm good morning. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?" Even though I totally wasn't fine. I just felt fine then all of a sudden. That was very brief. We just had this quick chit chat, but I really appreciated it and it made my morning. So after boarding, I didn't remember where this man had said he was sitting. And it's a big plane, and so I was just hoping that I would be able to find him in this sea of people and ask him for his song, because I wanted him to feel seen too. Luckily, I was able to find him walking through the aisles, and at some point during the flight after service, I came up to him with the journal and I said, "Hey, I really appreciated your kindness during boarding, and because of that, I wanted to share this project with you that I'm working on. I asked people to write about a song they associate with a happy memory, and I would love to hear what's your song." So later I came back and got the book from him. He said he appreciated getting to be part of the project. And I went over to my jump seat and read his entry. He put "Boy in the Bubble" by Paul Simon. Road trip with family, and this song, entire album really, being the first opportunity to bond with parents and brother through shared love of music, art, and storytelling. It is the memory of discovering that music is not of or by a particular generation, but rather a through line in our shared condition. So this very poetic and pensive entry stood out to me, because this isn't the sort of tone or depth that most people share when they talk about their song. So it sounded to me like he was some kind of writer. And he also signed his full name, which has this almost like a logo type look about it, as though he has signed it many, many times and perfected it and wants it to have a graphic look about it. So I Googled this name, Barton Seaver, and it turns out he is an author. He's published like 9 cookbooks, and he's a chef who specializes in seafood and sustainability. Seems like a really lovely human being, and I was happy to cross paths with him, and I'm very, very grateful for his kindness during that boarding and what he shared with me. So thank you to him. Second group of people is coworkers. The majority of coworkers I ask are other flight attendants, pilots, or gate agents. For obvious reasons, I interact with them the most. And I ask because I want to get to know them as people and not just as coworkers. With the flight attendants, it's a great way to bond outside of the day-to-day. I also want them to know that I'm doing this project, so that way if they see me in the aisle with my journal talking to a passenger, they don't have to wonder what's happening or like what I'm talking with them about. I don't really have a typical way that I ask them because it comes up differently almost every time. But at some point during our trip together, I will say, "Hey, this is a project I'm working on. It's about music. I ask people to share a song they associate with a happy memory. So if you think of one during our trip together, I would love for you to write it down." With pilots, I don't just ask to get to know them as coworkers. I also ask because sometimes it's kind of hard to connect with them. Even though we're working on the same plane for the same company, we often have very different paths for how we got there and reasons for doing it. because of that, we typically have very different personality types, and sometimes it's hard to find things to connect about. So through this project, I have discovered that music is a really safe subject. But typically we have this unwritten script of small talk. And I could tell you, like, 9 times out of 10 how the conversation is going to go if I don't bring up this music project. Like, every single flight attendant and every single pilot will probably talk about at least one of these things in their first conversation. And that's, where are you based? Do you live in base or do you commute? Ah, okay, they live in base. So what part of town are you in? Ah, they commute. So where do you commute from? How's the trip going for you? What are you doing today? And that means, what are you flying today? Like, where you end up? What kind of aircraft? How's your day going? That means, are people being nice to you? Or, what are you going to do on the layover? I've never been there. What is something I could do on the layover? These are all very safe subjects to talk about. But when that's the only conversation you ever have with someone in this position, it gets exhausting. So part of the reason I ask about the music project is to switch things up. I think we both appreciate it. And then there's also gate agents. I ask them because we don't get much opportunity for interaction beyond strictly business. It's like a way to acknowledge their humanity and help them remember, hey, I don't just see you as a coworker. I know you're a complex and beautiful human being underneath that uniform. And I just wanted to talk about something that makes us both happy. So that's why I asked them the question. And that's if I have time. Normally we don't. So if we have an opportunity to chat, that typically means something is wrong. Like, there's a delay or there's a cancellation. And then there's even more reason to discuss something that makes us human and that makes us happy. I want to remind them that I don't see them as just a number. I don't see them as just a cog in this corporate machine. I see them as a person. And this is a way to remind them of that. And it gives us an opportunity to share something personal rather than just professional. So I ask in different ways. One instance I can tell you about in detail is with a gate agent who works out of Vancouver. I don't remember why we were delayed, but we had boarded everyone and I was positioned at the boarding door. And then we had to wait for like several minutes and he was down there ready to close the boarding door. I said, hey, while we're waiting, I have a music question for you. And he said, oh, okay. So I pulled out the journal and I said, what's a song that reminds you of a happy memory? And he just lit up. He is such a sweet man. And he knew his answer right away, but he asked, is it okay that the song is not in English? And I said, absolutely, it's your song. It's more about the memory and the association you have with it anyway. So he wrote down here, Ekladki ko Oskna, 1942, A Love Story. I think he actually wrote the title wrong because when I Google it, it says Ekladki ko Deka. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But I remember the story. He said that it's this song from that film, 1942, A Love Story. And he had that song in his head on the day his daughter was born. And so the first time he ever held his daughter, he sang her that song. And now he associates that song with her. So it always makes him happy when he hears it. Sorry if you can hear the sirens happening in the background. And I have come into Vancouver several times throughout the course of this project, and every time I see him, we remember each other, and I ask how his daughter's doing. He asks how the project is going, and it's just so, so sweet. It makes me really look forward to going to Vancouver, honestly. Another big group of people who I ask is anyone with a visible link to music. So people carrying instruments or records, people playing instruments or performing music, people who work at music stores, anyone wearing t-shirts or accessories related to music, people who have musical tattoos, or like stickers on their suitcases, anyone who has a visible interest in music, I automatically gravitate towards because I believe they'd be excited to talk about this question, whether or not they have an answer, but most of the time they have an answer right away. How I typically ask is, hey, I see your music tattoo, or I see your shirt, or whatever, point out what we have in common. And then I say, I'm doing a music project and I thought you might want to hear about it. One of the recent entries was a guy named Gabriel, and he was playing a string instrument that was not a guitar and not a banjo and not a mandolin. It had a specific name that was very unique, and I had never heard of it before, but it looked like a big mandolin. I should Google this, actually. And he was standing outside of the Pike Place Market in Seattle playing this instrument, and he had a poster inside the case which said Omen Fog. And it's a really unique font, by the way. It looks runic, really interesting. So I just walked right up to him, and I didn't wait for him to pause the song he was playing. I just smiled and said, "Hey, what's a song that reminds you of a happy memory?" And he looked at me and stopped playing and then thought about it. And I said, sorry to interrupt your music. And he's like, "Oh no, I'm just thinking there's like a dozen songs that come to mind all at once." And he decided on Wishful Sinful by The Doors, and he put "reminds me of my teen years." I remember him saying that he associated The Doors with his mom and that they would sing a lot of the songs together. She would play a lot of their music while he was growing up. So I think that's another layer of it. Yeah, he said it was hard even just to pick one Doors song because they mean a lot to him. So I wanted to give him a shout out. If you want to check out his music, he is at omenfog.bandcamp.com, and he's very talented. Thank you, Gabriel. Another group of people who I ask are anyone who is journaling or drawing. I just found that I feel connected to those people instantly before any conversation because I identify with those forms of introspection and creative expression. So that common ground is a great way to start a conversation. If they're an artist, I would say something like, "Hey, I see you appreciate creative projects and I wanted to show you mine." Or if they're doing some journaling, I say, "Hey, could I ask what you're working on there?" One example is a man who was journaling on one flight. When I was doing service and I reached his row, I noticed that he was writing in a notebook, like leather-bound, relatively large, maybe 8.5 by 11 on each page. So I said, "Hey, can I ask what you're working on there?" He wasn't journaling. He said he was working on ideas and an outline for a website that he's putting together for a business that he owns. And we talked about websites because I had said I had just launched a website for my music project. So he asked what the project was, and I told him a little bit about it. And then after service, I went back up to him with the journal, and I showed him. So he wrote "Peaceful Easy Feeling" by the Eagles. "This reminds me of going off to college. My parents bought me a Volkswagen van, and I drove across the country from the East Coast to Los Angeles to go to college. I remember driving for days, wondering what my life was going to be like, not living with my parents. How was I going to like college? Who are all my friends going to be? Will I fall in love? What will I do as a career? How much money will I make? Will I be happy?" And the song sums it up in a time when I had no idea how my life was going to turn out. I had a peaceful, easy, and exciting feeling. At 67 years old, I can say that it all worked out. Thanks for asking me to share. His name was Rick. Thank you, Rick. The fifth setting where I ask people is in my own community. This started because I felt like I wasn't making enough progress by just asking at work or on flights, and I wanted to make sure I was still making consistent progress on the journal. So that's when I decided I need to ask at least one person a day, no matter what. You can hear more about that in episode 8, which is called "Only Another 3 Years of Asking." So, as I'm running errands and I'm going to the gym, I'm going to the grocery store, there's people there who I see repeatedly. And I didn't realize that the byproduct of asking them for their song would be to connect with them. Like, duh. And I regret knowing that my intention was more out of productivity than out of connection. But I'm really happy that I asked them because now every time I see them, we smile differently, we stop and chat, and it just makes me feel more connected to my own community through connecting with these people as humans rather than as our roles, So some examples are people at my gym, mechanics at the auto shop, or clerks at my grocery store. And how I ask is, "Hey, I have a random question for you." Just to kind of like prep them that, hey, I'm about to break the pattern here. So if you want to hear some examples of what has happened when I asked them, then you can go check out episode 8. I just don't want to be repetitive here, and I know it's a long episode, so I'm going to keep going. The sixth group of people I ask are people I already know. Family, friends, and family friends. And I ask because I want to share this part of myself with them. It's something big and important and time-consuming for me. So they want to hear about it. And also, asking this question enables us to deepen our bonds with each other. So I have asked my family, I have asked all of my best friends. Almost all of them have given me an answer. And there was one night I was at a game group with my parents, and I decided to ask their friends. They're my friends too, but they're more my parents' friends. There's like a degree of separation there. We know each other, we know the basic things that we can talk about together, but I thought asking about music would be a different sort of conversation for us all to have and a different way to get to know each other. I will say that I learned how not to ask the question, and that is by saying, hey, I just started a new project and I wondered if you'd all like to contribute. And I got up and I went to my purse to get out the journal, and apparently right after I got up and walked away and wasn't making eye contact, I guess they all kind of looked at each other thinking like, is she about to ask us for money? Because I heard my mom then say, she's not asking for financial contributions. She's like, it's to participate in the project. And they were like, oh, okay. So yeah, I feel bad about that, implying that I needed monetary contributions. That was a learning moment. And I quickly clarified, no, this is a collaborative endeavor, so I can't do it without you. I just want to hear your answer to this question, and I'd like for you to write it down in this book. One of the songs they wrote here was Working My Way Back to You by the Four Seasons. This woman put, we used to roller skate with our son to this song. Even though we were all there connecting already through card games, I appreciated, having a different sort of conversation and getting to hear from everyone individually. There was maybe like 10 of us sitting at this big round table, and we all took turns just sharing a little bit about our song. We all appreciated getting to share and getting to hear and learn more about, each other's backgrounds. It was really a great conversation. The seventh type of people who I like to ask are people who probably feel invisible. I've got several examples here. One is airport workers who probably feel like every day is the same and generally feel overlooked. Another example is an author who I saw at a book signing table. He was sitting there surrounded by books and no one was talking to him. Another time was on a layover where our shuttle driver had to drive us quite a ways to get to our hotel downtown. We were in the car together for at least 30 minutes. And because of the seating configuration, I sat up front next to the driver, and my crew members and I were all talking, and I wanted him to feel included in our conversation. So at some point, I asked him the question. But the story that I think means the most to me from this category is one time when I asked a homeless man. I was walking out of a store on a layover in Buffalo, New York, and I saw this young person, maybe around my age or a little bit younger, holding a cardboard sign. And ultimately I knew, even though he was asking for money, he was really asking for help and asking to be seen. He was asking to be treated like a human, and I wanted him to feel noticed and seen. It has to be really painful to stand out there and admit that you need help, but no one is helping you. They just keep walking past you, driving past you, trying not to make eye contact. It has to be deeply humbling and uncomfortable, especially the longer that it goes on. Maybe he was asking for a different kind of help than he truly needed. I don't know. But I thought at least we could help each other out, and I wanted it to be through connection, even if I had to pay for it in this instance. I remember handing him $1 and then saying, hey, I wondered if you could help me with a project I'm working on. I showed him the journal and I asked for his song, and he put More Than a Feeling by Boston. He said that he and his dad went to a lot of car shows when he was a kid, and that song played there pretty often. So it reminds him of, growing up and getting to spend time with his dad. The eighth setting or circumstance that I ask people the question is with crushes and dates. So, with crushes, it's a great way to break the ice. The best example of this is Michael, who you would hear about in episode 9 and 10. Episode 9 is called When I Use the Question as a Pickup Line, and episode 10 is called Is Music Holding You Back or Propelling You Forward? And I won't repeat myself. You can go hear about that story if you listen to those episodes. But I do remember on a date that I had shortly after I started the project, it was with a guy who was involved in music. I believe he was a music teacher, but I would have asked him the question no matter what he did, because it's important to me that I share this part of myself. Not only is it something that I'm working on and spending a lot of time in, but it's also a form of connection. It's a great way to get to know each other. How I typically ask in this setting is, hey, I want to tell you about this project I'm doing. So I asked my date, his name was Ryan, and he put Night Moves by Bob Seger. I remember him telling me that when he was a kid, he would make some mixtapes, and there was one that lasted about 30 minutes or so, and I guess all the songs on there were just well liked by everyone in his family. So they would play it a lot, and he realized that the tape lasted the exact amount of time that it would take for them to leave his childhood home and drive over to visit his grandmother. And that was the last song on the tape. So his association with that song is that every time it played, it was a signal, hey, you're about to go spend time with your grandma. You're going to go see someone you love. He still remembers the anticipation and the excitement. I thought that was really sweet. Another group of people who I ask is desired demographics. I've written down a list of several types of people that I want represented in this project. It's important to me that there is a rich and diverse representation of this emotional experience across all demographics. The journal should reflect different cultures, beliefs, experiences, professions, all these things, languages. So there's two ways that I can go about this. Sometimes I see people who are visibly on that list of groups of people I want represented. Best example of this is the Firefighters. You can listen to episode 7, which is called How Firefighters Responded to My Musical Emergency. And in that case, I asked because of their car and their uniforms. They were in a fire truck, obviously. But then the other type is sometimes I discover that people are on my list of target demographics, like asking a CEO. So I was working in first class, and I saw a passenger working on his laptop. He was really glued to it and kept it out as long as he could until the absolute last minute that he had to put it away to adhere to the safety regulations. And then, of course, as soon as he was able to take it back out, he was immediately working on his stuff again. Also, just based on the way he was dressed and the fact that he was sitting in first class, I just kind of assumed A, that he was very busy, but B, that he was very accomplished and working a demanding job. I was curious about what he did for a living, but he was so wrapped up in his work that I didn't really want to interrupt, and I didn't really think he would appreciate being interrupted. So I looked up his name. I just looked at his name on our seat map, and then I Googled it on the in-flight Wi-Fi, and I saw that he was a CEO. I really wanted to engage him in conversation, but again, I didn't want him to think that I was interrupting his very important work to ask him some silly music question. At some point during the flight, he came up to ask a question, like ask for a beverage, and I took that opportunity to ask how his day was going on a scale from 1 to 10. That's a pretty great conversation opener, by the way. It's playful, it's fun, and also if someone tells you that their day is like a 2, which did happen once, then you kind of know not to take it further and just, give them some grace and say, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope it gets better. But when I asked him, he said his day was a 7, which is a good sign. And then he asked about mine, and I said it was an 8. And he said, well, that sounds like a great day. What makes it so good today? And I said, well, my favorite band just announced that they came out with an album on vinyl, and there's only 5,000 copies ever being made. So they released it today, and I pre-ordered it, and I got one before it sold out. So I'm super excited. By the way, that band is Queens of the Stone Age, and the album was Alive in the Catacombs. And I am so stoked. It's in the mail. It's almost here. But it doesn't matter because I don't have a record player. That's beside the point. And then suddenly the conversation was about music. So I said, hey, actually, I have a music project. I ask people to share a song that they associate with a happy memory. Would you like to share your song in this journal? And he was excited to participate. So he wrote, Send Me On My Way by Rusted Root. Reliable in encouraging hooting, hollering, and general merriment in the basements of college dwellings of the late 1990s, Send Me On My Way pulled off the neat trick of being an acoustic-y song that skipped at a fast pace before hitting an outright sprint. Its listeners might not have been able to sing or remember all of its lyrics, but they did love how it made them feel, which was a lot of the time happy to be young, carefree, sometimes barefoot, and often coated with beer suds. Fun things to remember from New Jersey in the 1990s. So out of respect for his privacy and the fact that I Googled his name just to find out that he was a CEO, I don't think I should share that here, but I really appreciate him contributing. And the 10th way I ask this question is language-based. I would like to be able to connect with as many people as possible through this question, even if language is a barrier. So when I discover that I'm talking with someone who speaks another language, I try to ask them for a translation of this question. I realize I could just Google the question and translate it into other languages, but I don't think it's right to ask a machine to translate a question that I use specifically for human connection. So it's just another opportunity to connect with someone as a human being and to say, hey, I notice you specifically. I wanted to ask you specifically a really weird question. Could you help me translate this into your other language? And actually the first time I asked was when I was on the date with Ryan, who shared his song about the mixtape. And we were at a bar. I asked the bartender because I overheard him speaking Spanish. And I said, hey, I have a random question for you. Would you mind to translate this question into Spanish, or help me translate this question into Spanish? I can speak a little bit of Spanish, but I'm not fluent. So he gave me the translation, and then I asked for his song. He couldn't think of an answer in the moment, but he still lives on as part of the project because he helped me with that Spanish translation. And then there is the second component to this, which is when I discover that someone speaks one of these languages, I try to ask them in that language. It doesn't usually go well, but that has been really interesting and humbling. I feel like I look even stupider asking this question in other languages because I'm not able to provide as much context for why I'm asking. But there was one flight I was working into Havana, and most of the passengers were primarily speaking Spanish, but not much English. And then I, am the other way around. I primarily speak English, but not much Spanish. And there happened to be one passenger who was fluent in both languages. So he was helping communicate and interpret from both sides. If a passenger couldn't quite find the right words, he would help say it to me in English, and vice versa. And he was super nice. So I figured this was a great opportunity for me to finally ask in Spanish. So I went up to him during the flight after service and, leaned down and asked him in Spanish, and he understood. And I told him also in Spanish that it was my first time asking the question in another language. So he wrote 2 songs, and they are both in Spanish, and I don't quite know the translation or association. I'm sure he told me some things about his memories, but it was in Spanish, and I didn't quite know what was happening for the whole conversation. I'm sorry, I gotta be honest, but I appreciated it nonetheless. And so one of the songs he wrote here was Babasónicos by Irresponsables, and the lyrics he wrote are Somos culpables de este amor escandaloso, which translates to we are guilty of this scandalous love. Ooh. Well, there's a story there, but I don't know it because it was in Spanish. But I really appreciate him responding, and it was exciting for me to have an entry that I had asked for in another language. So those are 10 of the ways that I go about asking people. On the next episode, I'm going to share 5 more ways, as well as some takeaways and insights that I've learned from asking this question at least 500 times. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share your thoughts with me. There are a few ways to do so. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, you can drop a comment, or if you're on Instagram, you can connect with me at Happiness Soundtrack and comment on the post for this episode. Feel free to DM me about your song too. I would love to hear your story. As for my stories, I share a new one every other week. You can listen to all the stories on your favorite podcast platform, including YouTube, or you can read the blog at happinesssoundtrack.com. I hope this episode made you smile. Thank you very much for your support. I'm glad you're having a good time here. Have a great week, and I'll be back next time with a song and a smile.